The help needs to wait outside. You contaminate the inventory, Montgomery. This isn't a mop closet. This is supply, and supply moves the mission. You wait until 1600 for a requisition, and even then I might deny your request for that specialized floor solvent, because frankly, you look like you'd spill it immediately. Get that dirty rag out of my sight. Sergeant Sterling, a man whose entire military career appeared to be modeled on achieving maximum girth and minimum effort behind a Form 34A, leaned back in his repurposed ergonomic office chair, the air conditioner battling futilely against the oppressive humidity trapped within the metal confines of the supply cage. His crisp, starched uniform was a stark, almost insulting contrast to the faded, grease-stained utilities worn by the person standing outside the reinforced wire mesh. That person was Corporal Montgomery, and she held a mop, its damp cotton head resting against the concrete floor, a silent testament to the work that Sterling himself refused to acknowledge as necessary, the grinding, constant task of keeping a forward operating base from dissolving into bureaucratic filth. Montgomery said nothing. She simply adjusted the grip on the mop handle, her eyes flat and distant, reflecting neither anger nor subservience, only a vast, bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep could ever touch. Her gaze, however, lingered for a fraction of a second on the 3 neat lines of ribbons Sterling wore above his chest pocket: National Defense, Global War on Terrorism, and a Standard Service ribbon. Minor league stuff, decorations earned by simply being present. Sterling inflated himself, mistaking her silence for compliance, the look in her eyes for the dullness of low-level enlisted labor. He picked up a clipboard, not to read it, but to emphasize the barrier of paperwork that separated his perceived importance from her quiet insignificance. He saw a janitor, a low-clearance obstacle to his mandatory afternoon nap. He did not see the residue of cordite and high-velocity brass etched into the lines around her eyes, nor did he recognize the specific, almost surgical way she stood, balanced, ready, and utterly invisible. It was the invisibility she had cultivated, refined, and ultimately embraced. After the transfer, after the paperwork was buried under 7 different layers of compartmentalized security, after the mandatory psychological evaluations had confirmed her fitness to serve, but her unsuitability for combat rotation, maintenance had become her refuge. The mundane rhythm of the scrubbing buffer, the repetitive motion of the mop, the smell of industrial cleaner masking the permanent scent of burnt gunpowder that clung to her sinuses. These were the anchors that kept the darkness at bay. It was a trade-off: surrender the prestige, the lethal clarity, the life she knew, in exchange for anonymity and a path towards fragile, functional sanity. But before the mop, before the dingy utility uniform became her second skin, there was the silence of the long watch, the immense, terrifying solitude of the high ground. The transition back to that memory was instantaneous, triggered by the precise angle of Sterling's arrogant smirk. The metal grating of the supply cage dissolved into the dust-hazed perimeter of forward operating base Chapman, 12 clicks outside the accepted zone of safety during the unforgiving heat of late summer. That was where she had truly lived, elevated above the chaos, strapped into the prone position behind 38 pounds of specialized kinetic energy delivery system, the Barrett M107A1. The Barrett was not just a rifle, it was a conversation stopper, a high-caliber argument against enemy momentum. It fired a round the size of a man's thumb, designed not merely to incapacitate, but to vaporize soft targets and defeat light armor at ranges that seem impossible to the uninitiated. Her longest verified kill on record, the one that the internal reports consistently flagged with the highest sensitivity rating, had been 2,112 meters, over 1.25 miles. At that range, the bullet was airborne for over 3 full seconds, subject to every minute atmospheric shift the unforgiving Afghan environment could throw at it. She remembered the calculations with perfect, terrifying clarity. It was a complex, almost meditative dance of physics and environmental variables. She had to account for the muzzle velocity drop, the density altitude, which was agonizingly high on that ridge, and crucially, the rotational deviation caused by the Earth itself, the Coriolis effect. At over 2,000 meters, the Earth's rotation could shift the impact point by several feet laterally. If she failed to compensate for that, the round missed. If she missed, her spotter, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, would be the first to die,
exposed on the ridgeline. The scope, a Schmidt & Bender PM2, was cool against her brow, but the heat radiated up from the baked earth,
distorting the air into shimmering columns of light. Mirage, enemy number one. She wasn't just aiming at a target, she was aiming at a three-dimensional point in space where the target would be 3 seconds later, compensating for the wind she couldn't feel on her position, but could only estimate based on the subtle shifts in the dust devils miles away. The mission that day was standard Overwatch. A patrol of 4, 2 infantry, a medic, and their team leader, was conducting a dismounted sweep for IEDs along a known choke point leading into the valley. Standard until the ambush ignited. The first indication was not sound, but the visual disturbance, a flash of movement near the cluster of abandoned mud brick huts on the high side of the valley. Then the immediate frantic sound of localized small arms fire, the signature stutter of the AK-47, followed by the deep, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a belt-fed weapon. Rodriguez snapped the wind reading. Left to right, 9 knots, dropping to 7. They're pinned, 6 hostiles, heavy machine gun, position Alpha 3. Montgomery's breath hitched, not in fear, but in the immediate, paralyzing necessity of speed. They were too close. Her primary targets were the machine gunner and the spotter immediately flanking him. The infantry patrol had dropped into the shallow drainage ditch, but the machine gun had achieved immediate suppression, effectively trapping them under a hail of rock-shattering fire. Range 1980. Density altitude 6,000 feet. Barrel temp 120. Setting 1.5 minutes of left drift for Coriolis, 3.7 mils elevation, she whispered, her voice dry, clinical. Her finger found the trigger shoe, the last vestiges of heat and pulse fading into the cold, precise machinery of the weapon. This was the moment she always revisited, the split second before chaos, where she held 4 lives in the absolute stillness of her breath. She exhaled slowly, precisely 80% of the air in her lungs, establishing the breathing pause that stabilized the rifle. The crosshairs settled on the machine gunner's chest, slightly high, to allow for the massive bullet drop. She knew the machine gunner was using tracers, red streaks marking the line of fire directly over the heads of the trap patrol. They had maybe 30 seconds before the machine gunner adjusted his aim lower and ended the fight violently. Squeeze. The recoil of the .5 caliber round was a physical event, a sledgehammer blow against her shoulder, a momentary flash of brilliant white light obscuring the world. The sound was deafening, a sharp concussive crack that rolled down the valley like a thunderclap. The target vanished, not simply dropped but exploded into a spray of dust and organic matter. The machine gun went silent, the ammunition belt snapping back, lifeless. Rodriguez already working the bolt, confirming the kill. Target 1 neutralized, fast. Target 2, his spotter is taking aim with an RPG, now. The distance was too great for a second precision shot. The target had shifted and was moving erratically. She didn't have time to reestablish her breathing pause, didn't have time to fully account for the lateral shift. It didn't matter. She had to neutralize the immediate, overwhelming threat to the patrol. She pulled the trigger again, the barrel already hot, vibrating slightly from the first shot. The projectile tore through the air. It was a near miss, impacting the mud wall directly beside the enemy spotter, not vaporizing him, but bathing him in rock shrapnel and concussive shockwave. He stumbled, dropped the RPG launcher, clutching his head, disoriented, momentarily neutralized. That second shot, though a technical miss, bought the patrol the critical 6 seconds they needed. The team leader, Sergeant Miller, recognized the opportunity instantly. Suppressing fire, move, move. Montgomery, hold that flank. Miller and his team used the sniper cover to break the pin. They laid down heavy, coordinated fire, advancing 5 meters at a time, moving laterally away from the choke point and toward the high ground. But as they cleared the ditch, another burst of heavy fire erupted from a new, previously undetected position in the wadi below, a second machine gun. Rodriguez cursed, slamming his fists lightly against the earth. We missed the second position, 200 meters low. They're flanking the patrol. The 4 infantrymen were exposed. The new position had a clear line of sight, and the tracers were finding flesh. The medic went down first, a clean hit to the leg, shattering bone. Miller tried to drag him, but the covering fire was too tense. They were caught between the high ground and the deep cut of the wadi. Montgomery instinctively broke protocol. The Barrett M107A1 was designed for extreme range engagement, for massive kinetic impact. It was not meant for dynamic, close-quarters suppression. Certainly not at only 200 meters. But she was the only one with the clear angle. The only one who could stop the incoming fire instantly. She rapidly dialed the elevation down, ignoring the barrel heat that was now distorting the sight picture entirely. She racked the bolt, pushing another heavy round into the chamber. Instead of aiming for center mass, which would only kill one target and likely wound 2 others, She chose a specific, brutal target, the machine gun itself. She aimed for the cooling jacket, the point of maximum structural weakness just behind the flash suppressor. She did not breathe this time. She simply let the rifle recoil, absorbing the punishing kinetic energy back into her body. The round hit the machine gun squarely. The effect was catastrophic. The steel jacket warped, the internal workings seized, and the explosion of pressure blew the barrel assembly into several jagged, high-speed fragments. The hostile gunner and his assistant were shredded by the shrapnel, immediately silenced. But the violence of the reaction was too much. The blast wave reached her position instantly, not from the enemy but from the rifle itself. The M107, compromised by the sustained rapid fire, had finally given way. The force of the explosion traveled back through the action. The scope mount failed, and the heavy piece of optics slammed into her face, fracturing her orbital bone and tearing a deep gash down her cheek. Simultaneously, a piece of overheated brass ejected at an impossible angle, slicing open her hand before she could fully release the weapon. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, punctuated only by the ringing in her ears and the panicked breathing of Rodriguez. Down below, the patrol was safe. Staff Sergeant Miller checked his comms, which had been jammed by the initial ambush. "Montgomery, report. What was that last shot? You just saved our asses. Report." Montgomery tasted blood, iron, and dust. She looked at her hand, which was blooming dark red, staining the rifle stock. She looked at Rodriguez, who was already applying a pressure bandage to her face. Weapon down. Reloading. 4 lives secured. She choked out, her voice ragged, already beginning to fade back into the clinical detachment that combat demanded. She had secured 4 lives. She had violated 3 standing orders regarding the operational capacity of the Barrett platform. She had demonstrated a level of aggression and rapid precision fire that put her in a specific, highly undesirable echelon of combat specialist, the type that saves lives, but is forever haunted by the violence required to do so. The commendations followed swiftly: the Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Purple Heart for the wounds sustained, minor compared to the internal damage, and a sheaf of classified citations that effectively granted her Level 10 clearance on any base she walked onto, not because of her rank, but because of what she knew and what she was capable of doing again. The designation meant her records were untouchable, her presence was to be overlooked, and her current low-level assignment was non-negotiable cover. She was a ghost allowed to clean floors because she couldn't stand the sight of blood on walls anymore. And now, here she was, in the oppressive heat of the supply cage, being called the Help by a man whose most strenuous military activity was arguing with the base commander over the optimal deployment of high-gloss floor wax. The ringing in Montgomery's ears, the phantom echo of the .5 caliber muzzle blast, slowly receded, bringing her back to the sterile, irritating reality of Sergeant Sterling, who was now leaning forward, his bulk straining the fabric of his polyester uniform. "Are you even listening, Montgomery? Or is the smell of ammonia fumes all you can process these days? You know, the general consensus is that maintenance is where we put the soldiers who can't handle the pressure, the ones who cracked. You look like you're doing a fine job of proving that right, standing there with that sad, wet mop, wasting my time." This was the line. The professional insult, the denial of necessary equipment, that was standard bureaucracy. But the implication that she was weak, that she had cracked, that was a direct assault on the sacrifice she had made to keep 4 patrol members alive and keep her own shattered psyche marginally whole. She felt a familiar, cold spike of anger, not the hot rage of battle, but the quiet, controlled fury of absolute injustice. She straightened imperceptibly, the utility uniform stretching over the lean muscle that the daily labor had kept razor sharp. She was about to offer a response, carefully measured to cut Sterling without violating the chain of command, when the air in the room changed. It was not a sudden noise or a dramatic entrance. It was a complete shift in the pressure, the subtle, unmistakable signal that an apex predator had entered the enclosure. The door to the supply depot hissed open, letting in a blinding shaft of afternoon sunlight, silhouetting the figure standing there. The figure was not Sterling's peer, nor his superior in rank, but his superior in every functional, deadly way. The man was encased in operational gear, dark, high-quality Crye precision fatigues, carrying the quiet, confident lethality that only comes from deep immersion in the world's most demanding combat environments. He wasn't Navy, he wasn't Army, he was operator. The rifle slung across his chest was the immediate giveaway, an HK-416, meticulously maintained,
clearly customized for deep integration. The HK-416 is not a standard-issue weapon. It is an instrument of elite warfare, famous for its flawless reliability under the most extreme conditions, a symbol of professional fidelity within Tier 1 units. The weapon looked like an extension of the man's body, familiar and dangerous. His face was weathered, his eyes scanning the entire depot, the ingress, the egress, the contents of the shelves, the body language of the two people inside, all in the span of 1 second. He was looking for a specific item, a satellite comms battery, urgently needed for an exfil operation being staged on the far side of the base. But his immediate tactical scan snagged on the tableau by the wire mesh, a puffed-up supply sergeant humiliating a silent, dirt-stained maintenance corporal. The operator stopped. His gaze moved from the clean arrogance of Sterling to the silent, immobile intensity of Montgomery. Something clicked. He recognized the specific, almost rigid stillness of her posture, the way she was holding her mop as if it were a tertiary weapon system. Sergeant Sterling, oblivious to the shift in atmospheric pressure, tried to regain control of his domain. "Excuse me, operator, but this section of the depot is closed for inventory, unless you have a pre-approved Form 12R signed by—" The operator didn't look at Sterling. He didn't interrupt with words. He interrupted with presence. He took one smooth, gliding step toward the mesh, his eyes locked on Montgomery's face, tracing the pale, slightly jagged scar line running down her cheekbone, the subtle tightness around her mouth. He could read the language of combat trauma like a map. He spoke, his voice low, gravelly, and utterly devoid of emotion, a tone that required instant, absolute attention. "Corporal, your ID, please." It was not a request. It was an order delivered from a rank that transcended the standard military structure, the kind of order you obeyed before your brain registered the instruction. Montgomery, without breaking eye contact with Sterling, reached inside her dirty utility shirt pocket and pulled out the laminated Common Access Card, CAC. She slid it through the dispensing slot in the wire mesh. Sterling sputtered indignantly. "Hey, her ID is irrelevant to your requirement, operator. She's just maintenance. I'm the one you need to talk to about inventory control." The operator ignored Sterling as if the sergeant were a buzzing insect. He took the CAC card, turning it over to examine the backside, which contained the coded access details and security clearances. He read the microprint slowly, deliberately. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly before snapping back to the professional mask. The Level 10 clearance stamp, the embedded citation codes, the compartmentalized unit designation. It told a story that Sergeant Sterling, in his insulated supply cage, could never fathom. It confirmed that the woman holding the mop was, on paper, one of the most protected and potentially dangerous assets on the entire base. He looked back at the corporal, her face a blank slate of endured hardship. His voice, when it came again, was softer now, infused with a recognition that transcended rank. He began to read, not from the CAC card, but from the classified summary, the silent narrative of her body. "Corporal Montgomery, I see the scar above your left orbital socket. I see the 3 inches of jagged keloid tissue on your firing hand. I recognize the deliberate attempt to hide what you have earned." He flipped the card over, scanning the ribbons she didn't wear, the citations she had requested to be rendered inactive for the sake of her current cover. He read them aloud, each word landing like a physical blow in the sudden absolute silence of the supply depot. "Bronze Star with V device for valor, awarded for extreme heroism in combat operations at FOB Chapman, resulting in 4 confirmed lives saved under fire. Citation notes exceptional command presence and technical lethality during a high-stakes ambush." Sterling went physically pale, his mouth opening slightly in a silent, grotesque gasp. He looked from the clean CAC card to the dirty utility uniform,
trying to reconcile the image of the mop-wielding help with the reality of a certified combat hero. The operator continued, his gaze intense. Purple Heart, sustained wounds from weapons fire and shrapnel during the aforementioned engagement. The wounds were classified as Category 2, serious but non-life-threatening. The wounds were not physical, Sterling. They were the price of saving your infantry. He paused, letting the weight of the moment crush the air out of the supply depot. Combat Action Ribbon, 2 Presidential Unit citations, 1 Expeditionary Medal, and most importantly, Corporal, a security clearance level that dictates immediate and total compliance from every service member on this base, including me, and especially you, Sergeant. He leveled his gaze at Sterling, whose posture was now dissolving into a pathetic, shaking heap. She did not crack, Sergeant. She transcended the combat environment. She earned the right to choose her peace and her rank, regardless of the men who tried to diminish it. The operator then did the unthinkable. He took the HK-416 off his chest, releasing the sling. This weapon, an extension of his life,
a testament to his trade, was considered sacred. To hand it to another professional was the highest possible honor, a silent confession of absolute trust and respect. He reached through the mesh, offering the rifle, muzzle down, toward Montgomery. "Corporal," the operator said, his voice now a mere whisper, acknowledging the secret combat fellowship that existed between them, a shared understanding of trauma and extreme capability. "Hold this for a moment. Just hold the weight of it. You earned the right to touch the sharpest tools we have." The HK-416 was perfectly balanced, cold, and impossibly heavy. Its finish was smooth, clean, the product of thousands of hours of obsessive maintenance. Montgomery's eyes, which had been flat and dead, flickered to life. She dropped the mop. The sound of the wet cotton head hitting the concrete floor was a hollow, distant sound in the overwhelming silence. She reached out with her left hand, the one unscarred by the ejected brass, and took the rifle. Her fingers closed around the familiar texture of the Magpul grip, instantly settling into the firing stance, even without the rest of the body movement. It was muscle memory, etched into her DNA by fire and fear. The simple act of holding the weapon was a reconnection to her past, a validation of the violence she contained. For that one brief, agonizing moment, the janitor uniform disappeared, replaced by the ghillie suit, the elevation, and the cold, crystalline clarity of a world seen through a high magnification scope. She looked down the barrel, the geometry of the iron sights perfectly aligned, and then back at the operator. She did not smile, but a shadow of recognition passed between them, two entities that understood the true cost of warfare, the difference between rank and skill, the distance between paperwork and blood. Sergeant Sterling was frozen, utterly destroyed. He was gray, trembling, the reality of the woman he had insulted crashing down on him, the pride in his uniform, the arrogance of his position. The entire fragile structure of his self-importance had been irrevocably shattered by the simple, heavy transfer of an elite rifle. He was staring at the gun, terrified, realizing that the janitor could disassemble him faster than he could fill out a complaint form. Montgomery held the HK-416 for only 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. She handed it back to the operator, but first, maintaining muzzle safety, a sign of discipline that needed no verbal confirmation. The operator took the rifle, slung it back into place, and then turned his cold, tactical stare onto Sterling. "I need that satellite comms battery, now. And when I return, I expect Corporal Montgomery's full requisition to be ready, packaged, and delivered to her vehicle by you, Sergeant, immediately. You understand my requirement?" Sterling could only nod, a spastic movement of the head, unable to speak. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, avoiding the glare of the janitor who was secretly a decorated killer. Montgomery picked up her mop. She adjusted the brim of her dirty fatigue cap, the mop now feeling exactly like what it was, a tool for simple, honest labor. The validation had been delivered not by a formal reprimand, but by an ultimate, silent gesture of respect from a warrior who knew the true weight of the world. She pushed her supply cart past the trembling sergeant, the wheels squeaking slightly, the only sound left in the room, leaving the supply cage not as the help, but as the ghost of the ridgeline, untouchable and unseen once more. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.